Our world is changing. It always has, of course. But the pace of change that we're experiencing today seems different. And for those of us whose lives revolve around the natural world, it's obvious that change is coming for the things that we cherish too. Whether you hunt or fish, camp or climb, it's impossible not to recognize that the wild world is under immense pressure. By one estimate, we're losing more than 2 million acres of open, wild space every single year. That's the equivalent of an entire Yellowstone National Park of open space disappearing annually. Meanwhile, across the world, wildlife populations have declined on average 73% over the past 50 years. Here at home, on America's public lands, visitation and use has skyrocketed, reaching record levels year after year after year, with the most recent data showing nearly 1 billion recreational visits annually. But at the same time, staffing and budgets for the agencies stewarding these lands are being slashed. And the same thing is happening to the state and federal agencies managing our wildlife populations. Now, at the same time, though, passionate advocates and sportsmen and women and conservationists of all types are engaging in new approaches to stewarding and protecting our wildlife and wild places in exciting and more innovative ways than ever. All of this raises questions, very important questions. Where are we headed? What does the future hold for wildlife and wild places and public lands and waters? What will all this mean for the hunters and anglers and outdoor recreators of all types who depend on these wild things? The questions are obvious. The answers, less so. And that's why I've started this project. Aldo Leopold, more than 75 years ago, wrote in his renowned book, Sand County Almanac, that there are some who can live without wild places and some who cannot. That book and this podcast are for those who cannot. Future Wild is here to seek out the experts and insights that might help us all better understand what the future might hold for the wildlife and wild places that we hold dear and the outdoor pursuits that we've built our lives around. And so, as we begin this exploration, it seems that a good place to start might be with someone who's been trying to answer these same questions for himself and the broader public for more than 50 years. My guest today is Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia and an avid angler, kayaker, climber, and outdoor recreator of all types. He has been, and still is, one of the foremost voices in the environmental, outdoor recreation, and business communities. And over his many decades in the public eye, he's championed two ideas that I think are of particular importance as we head into this murky future. The first of these is that by being thoughtful about how we conduct our lives and simplifying our outdoor pursuits, we might be able to better enjoy and engage with the natural world. And secondly, if we want to hike or hunt or camp or fish on our home planet well into the future, we damn well better be doing something ourselves to make sure it stays in good shape. Today, I want to ask Yvon about both of these ideas, how he's put them into action in his own life and the impact that's had, as well as how we might as well. Thanks for being here. This is Future Wild, presented by Conservation First Bank. Yvon, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, you're welcome.
This is a conversation I've been looking forward to for a long time. As I just mentioned a second ago, as so many of us have, I've followed your work and your words and your actions for many, many years now, and have really respected how you've led your business and your life and how you engage with the natural world. I think is a particular interest of mine. And so I wanted to start by unpacking something that you wrote in not your most recent fishing related book, but the one just prior to that, Simple Fly Fishing. You wrote about simplifying your approach to fishing with a tool called a Tenkara rod. And you stated the following. I'm going to read you this quote, and I'd like your thoughts on it. You said, "The lesson we learn from fishing with a Tenkara rod is that we shouldn't fear that a simpler life will be an impoverished life, Rather, simplicity leads to a richer and more satisfying way of fishing and, more importantly, living. Yvon, why is that the case?
Well, it's worked for me. So, I mean, I've done a lot of different sports in my life, and I've always worked towards simplicity in all of those sports. Like, I was a spear fisherman, and I learned to scuba dive, but I didn't like it. I preferred to, sit at home and hold my breath. And in fact, in school, I used to hold my breath in math class a lot and almost pass out. But you know, train my body to dive and and more naturally. And in fact, if you're spearing fish, it's far more effective than using a scuba tank because the bubbles scare the fish away. So, and in climbing, it's the same thing. It's I've always felt like you start out, you do a 10-day route on El Capitan, and then pretty soon people are soloing the thing, and it's natural progression. Like I have my family doctor in Jackson Hole, his son and his buddy a couple years ago climbed the nose of El Capitan naked, shoeless at night.
Wow. That's really taking things to the next level.
Well, yeah, I mean it's I know. I mean, talk about hunting. I know a guy who started elk hunting with telescopic sight rifle and everything, and he went. Then that was too easy, so he went to bow hunting, and finally he went to spear. He hunts elk with a spear. He just puts on an elk costume, smears
Wow.
musk over himself, and spears them. I mean, that's what the caveman did. I mean,
Right?
or the early man. They used spears, and so I think it's just a natural progression towards perfection. So I always believe that perfection is not attained when you can't add anything more to what you're doing, but you can't take anything away. So that's what I learned with the Tenkara rod is that uh, when I learned to use it properly with soft hackles and stuff, and I was out fishing my friends with all the gear and stuff.
I remember the first time I heard about Tenkara. It was probably 10 to 15 years ago, probably around when that last book came out, give or take a little bit. And I remember thinking that it was it was too simple. It almost seemed like, oh, that wouldn't be as much fun because it lacked everything that you have with the reel and the ability to reach out there and do different things. But now over the last 10 to 15 years, as I've progressed as an angler myself, I've increasingly found myself more and more intrigued by it and seeing the appeal of that simplicity and being able to focus on a few fit things, but deeply. Um, but I'm curious about this, Yvon. When you look at the world we're in today, it is increasingly digital, increasingly virtual, increasingly high speed, increasingly complex in so many different ways. I think there's some people who would hear this and they would say, that's anachronistic. Uh that's so old fashioned. That's one reaction to this. But is it possible that because of the fact that our world is like that now today, so virtual, so digital, so complex, is this simple approach more important because it's so different from the rest of life or not?
Well, it's not just different, but it's a lot more satisfying. Um, this old guy in Italy that taught me how to tenkara fish. They've been doing it on this river since the 16th century. And he has a big old bamboo pole with a horsehair line that he makes himself. He ties his own flies without a vise, and he can make that line go down 4 feet. He can get his fly down 4 feet down, or he can make it float, depending on what he does with the current. And I mean, I've tried to duplicate that. I can't do it. It's I'm not there yet. And I've asked him how he happens to do that. And he said, "Well, I could tell you, but it'll take all the joy away from learning on your own."
Hmm.
And I've always, I played tennis. I've had one tennis lesson in my life. The guy just sat and stared at the ball. But I'm self-taught in everything. I mean, climbing, kayaking, spearfishing, all the different sports that I've done. I've always been. I don't like people telling me what to do, and I don't like to tell people what to do. So I found it's pretty satisfying to learn all these things on your own, and to have all the answers figured out by this digital world. It just robs you of a lot of things, I think.
It's the simple analogy, I guess, is right. You can either, Mount Washington over there in New Hampshire, right? You can take you can ride right to the top of the mountain and see the
Yeah,
exact same view, or you can hike to the top of the mountain.
yeah.
But the experience of that summit is dramatically different depending on which process you went through to get there, right? Um, it's all about that process and that journey. And it seems like in something like fishing, where the popular culture of the moment and of some number of years, I mean, this isn't new, but it's obviously very focused on the outcome. It's very focused on catching a lot of fish or catching the big fish. Um, you have taken this alternative approach, which is all about like how you catch the fish and how you learn to catch the fish and what that's like. And in that first book, it was about the rod and kind of tackle setup you used. And now this latest book, Pheasant Tail Simplicity, it's about the actual fly choice and the fact that you've been able to simplify. I know one year, a handful of years ago, you used just one fly the entire year for all of these different trips and these different species. All you did was adjust the size and some particulars. Can you tell me about that experience? How your growth as an angler progressed when you were forced to simplify in that way? You mentioned that that's so satisfying, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that actual experience and maybe there were some frustrations along the way too.
Well, I think whenever you try to simplify your sport or your life or whatever, it forces you to be creative. And yeah, I mean, when I started fishing with a tenkara rod, I I caught some Atlantic salmon with it, and forces you to not just stand there and grind down your break on your reel, but you got to run. You got to
Yeah,
run like
an athletic
crazy.
endeavor. One of the things that I've thought about when I was reading, in the past about your experiences, and I've heard you talk about in the past, and then more recently as I was preparing for this, I got to thinking that by simplifying, not only is it more satisfying because of that process, but I imagine it is also maybe more enjoyable in the moment because you are not paralyzed by indecision. Maybe this is just me, but I'm curious if you ever had this. I'll be on the Snake River, or I'll be on the Gros Ventre or something there. I spend a lot of time out in that neck of the woods too. And I'll sit there, and if it's not the obvious easy thing going, if there's not an obvious hatch going, and the fish are cooperating with whatever I threw out there at first, I might find myself cycling through idea after idea after idea, and all these different flies, and you could drive yourself crazy thinking through my 6 different boxes I can look through and all the different iterations. And when I read about what you did with these pheasant tail variations or these wet hackle flies that you've used, all throughout the year. That must be so freeing to release yourself from that, at least that part of the decision making. And then you can instead just focus on where are the fish? What's the proper presentation? Where in the water column? Um, does that just relieve a whole level of stress or anxiety or confusion in the fishing experience and just lets you enjoy it all more?
Yeah, it absolutely does. You're replacing all those flies and all that gear with knowledge. And, I say in the book that a 9 foot 5 weight rod, after you cast, it's just a stick in your hand. Whereas a tenkara rod, after you cast, is when the action begins because you're working that tip and making the fly look like a living insect instead of, if you're dry fly fishing with duns, yeah, you want a dead drift. You don't want any action. But if you're using hoppers, you want that hopper to be moving around, or a mouse, or an emerger, and you can't do that with a modern stiff rod. And so, what I learned from Tenkara, I now fish with a cane rod mostly, which has really good action, or I use a 10 foot 2 weight rod, which has that good tip action. So after I cast, I found that the most important uh, aspect of a fly is action. It's not, and then after that, it's the size of the fly, and then after that, it's the type of fly. But action is what's the most important. Trout are predators, just like your cat or a grizzly bear or whatever. Grizzlies love it when you run, right?
Yeah, don't do that.
And you can draw a toy mouse across the room in front of your cat, and then go into and it stare at it, and then you stop it and give it a twitch, and that's when the cat pounces.
Yeah.
And that's what I do with that 10 foot rod or my cane rod, and it's another way of fishing, and we've gotten pretty specialized. I have friends that are only dry fly fishing, or they only tie flies, or they're only nymph fishermen, or they're only streamer fishermen. But if you're a dry fly fisherman, there's hardly any hatches anymore. Have you noticed that?
It's different, isn't it?
If you go to New Zealand, or if you go to Italy or something where there's hatches, you're amazed at how many insects there are. You go to Henry's Fork, there's nothing going on anymore. And so if you're only a dry fly fisherman, you got about an hour a day of action. And then what do you do the rest of the day? I mean, that's fine if you live next to the river, you can go out that 1 hour. But if you've driven 1,000 miles to get there, and so you gotta be more than a one trick pony. And
Yeah.
but I think what we've done, what I tried to get across in this book, is that fish the water the way it should be fished. And it fish, if it's fast running water, forget the dry fly, and you don't know where the fish are. Forget the dry fly. Use a soft tackle or something, and you can cover a lot of ground. Or if the fish are down 20 feet down, you better nymph them. They'll never come up for a dry fly or even a soft tackle or anything. So fish the water it should be fished, and that's similar to climbing. You adapt according to the type of rock and the steepness and but it forces you to look at rivers in a different way. It forces you to look for little eddies and currents and feed lines. It opens up a whole other world instead of sitting on a drift boat with a bobber and a couple flies and just, you know, be oblivious about what's going on.
So, in this most recent book, and I don't remember where and what context this was, but I remember you mentioning something that I've heard you speak about before too, which is how this kind of approach can help lead to deep knowledge. And as I read this book, I couldn't help but think that this book, it is about fishing, but it's almost about a whole lot more. I could see how somebody could look at this book, and if they took out the, specifically how to tie certain flies, and if they just look at the broad philosophy, this is almost a book that could have been changed a little bit and could have been about climbing, or could have been about surfing, or could have been about backpacking or hunting or spearfishing, as you mentioned. There's so many different places where I think this pursuit of deep knowledge could be of value, and I think that's something you've advocated for a lot of folks. But could you tell us a little bit more about what that is, deep knowledge, and what that might look like across all these different pursuits that folks like us have?
Yeah, well, like I said, the average person driving by a river or something, they just see flowing water and that's it. There's a lot to a river. Uh, Knowing that the upper part of the current is flowing at a different speed than the center down in the middle of the river, and in fact on the bottom it could be going the opposite way, a reversal. And thinking in 3D like that is different than your average person looking at a river. And it's the same thing with a rock climber driving down the road and he sees a cliff and he can tell immediately whether it's climbable, whether it's good rock. He can see lines on it, and it's no different than a bird watcher, or it's it's all that deep knowledge that is so satisfying when you get that. It's the 10,000 hours of learning any craft, they say, and
Yeah.
for me, that's what I'm looking for in whatever sport I do.
Was there a moment, Yvonne, when you came to that realization that this is what you were looking for? I know that you wrote about clean climbing and all of that at a relatively young age. But was this just something like that is just who you are naturally from day one? When you were a kid, you were wanting to simplify, or did it take a while for you to start excelling in many of these things and having success in many of these things, and then realizing, oh, I don't want to take the path that everybody else is taking. I want to take this different path. Um, does one of those two different scenarios line up with your actual experience?
Well, I came across it, organically, and but I didn't understand it so well until I started reading like books on Zen, Zen philosophy, and then it all started making sense. And I I wrote about this in this one book I did about Zen and how I was a whitewater kayaker, and I've been all over the world doing first descents, rivers and stuff from New Guinea to all over California and different places, South America. And the day I really learned to kayak is I did the Grovant in Jackson
Hmm.
at high water, which is a good class 4 river.
Yeah.
It falls, I don't know how many feet per mile, but it's really fast. Hardly any eddies. And I used to do that. And one day I decided I had learned to do an Eskimo roll with, just with my hands,
Hmm.
no paddle. And so I thought, well, I'm going to do this river by myself and not take a paddle. And I did. And
Wow.
it's it to do that, I had to look further ahead than I normally do instead of, waiting till the last second and doing a big doofuck stroke or something going around a rock. So I had to look way ahead. I had to bank the boat on its edge to make it turn. It's like a pair of skis. It's rounded, So I had to put it on its edge and go around and then keep my hands in the water. And when I went over a drop, I had to make sure I didn't, just go backwards on the drop. I had to go into the drop.
Hmm.
And that day I learned to kayak.
Hmm.
I learned to use the river and not depend on this paddle, which is a really powerful tool. And I did a perfect run.
Wow.
Absolutely perfect run. It's like I was a fish going down the river. So that's kind of a little Zen thing that I learned through that sport.
Yeah, and I could see how there's some different version of that probably for any one of our outdoor pursuits, right? It's that I guess it's a version of that flow state that sometimes people talk about. I imagine that
Exactly.
this approach is a much cleaner way to find that flow state. I would guess.
Yeah. Well, I went back to kayaking again, but I used the paddle, but in a different way.
Yeah. So you make a very clear case for why a simpler approach to fishing or climbing or kayaking or anything, why that's better for us, the user. But I wonder, is the simpler engagement with nature, is the simpler approach to whatever kind of outdoor pursuits we have, is that better for the future of the natural world?
Well, people are asking me all the time, uh, what can they do to save the planet? You know, and I tell them, I mean, I'm a real pessimist. I tell them until we get a spiritual connection with nature, nothing is going to happen. As long as we think nature's over there and we're over here and we're separate, we're not going to do anything. And so, how do you get that deep connection with nature? One of the ways is through bird watching. One of the ways is through sport. And I think sport is anybody can do this and get outside and be in nature. You don't have to be a tree hugger, but the more you're in nature, the more you learn to appreciate it, the more you realize that we are not only dependent on nature, we're animals. We're, we're just animals. And
Yeah.
as we destroy nature and all these other animals are going extinct, we're facing the same problems ourselves. And so that's something anybody can do. And I really believe in getting people out and doing these sports.
So I feel the same way. I've always thought that, the only way you could save something or care for something or work for something is if you love it, right? And you can only love something that you know intimately and have experienced and engaged with. So I've always thought that's a really strong case to introduce as many people to the outdoors as possible, to give them that connection, like you mentioned. But the devil's advocate would say to me and might say to you, well, the more people that are out there, the more pressure we put on the landscape, the more hunters are at the trailhead, the more runners are on the trail, the more anglers are in the river pounding these fish on warm days. There's a lot of concerns, real concerns about loving these things to death, too. How do you square that? How do you reckon with that?
Well, that is a toss up, um, but it's also on how you do your sport. You know, if you're in this drift boat with a guide paying $1,000 a day, and you're just staring at a bobber, and every fish you catch, the guy puts it in the net, hauls it out, and you take a picture out of the water, and you well, you're destroying this river, you're destroying the fish, and if you even using lead. a nympher using lead weights. I mean, some of the best fishermen around, nymph fishermen, they're using lead weights, which one BB in a swan will kill it.
Hmm.
I mean, that's what's happening with the condors, or a hunter using lead bullets. I mean, it goes all through the whole chain of animals, and finally you're killing bald eagles, and um, so it's all on how you do it. And I think there's not much we can do about the population, but we can be more responsible in how we do these sports. And I think by simplifying what we are doing, well, first of all, I've been telling people to not consume irresponsibly, consume better, which means buying few products, but the best that you can buy that'll last a lifetime. Don't buy a banana cutter, for God's sakes. Anybody can cut a banana. but I wrote a op-ed piece for the New York Times that I thought that the answer to what to do with petroleum is we should just use the petroleum that causes the least amount of damage. I don't know where that is. Maybe it's Saudi Arabia, where it's all desert anyway. And leave the tar sands alone. Leave the Amazon alone. So and slowly work our way out of using petroleum altogether. But start with the worst quality petroleum and stop using that. And I think it's the same thing with, somebody said poor people can't afford cheap stuff. You can buy a blender that as soon as you put ice cubes in it blows out, and you got to buy another one and another one and another one. Buy something that'll last the rest of your life. And I use the example of when my wife was 21, I gave her a chef knife out of carbon steel, and I'm a blacksmith, so I know steel, and I know stainless steel makes the worst knives conceivable, whether it's a hunting knife or what. And carbon steel, you can sharpen, razor sharp, you can shave with it. And we've had this knife for 53 years, and it'll be handed down to my kids and grandkids, and so one knife instead of buying a bunch of stuff. So I really think that that's something anybody can do in their lives. I mean, we're using up the resources of 7 planets or something. Well, that leads to bankruptcy. It's so obvious that we can't do this forever. So we got to consume less. And, one of these days the population will go down naturally or unnaturally, but it will go down. And, but right now we should just, buy used clothes. That's the most responsible thing you can do as far as clothes go. And in fact, we're trying to make that fashionable, to make it cool for young people to go out and buy used clothes. And it's happening. It really is.
I do love the fact that you guys have been willing um, to push back on the typical narrative of buy, more. And obviously, it's been great for your business, telling folks not to buy your jackets. But also, you've gone beyond that and actually put together programs to help support the second-hand use system and repairs. And so I've always appreciated that you guys have really led in that way. Um, I want to circle back to something you brought up a moment ago, which is something I've heard you say many times before, and it always struck me. You've frequently said that you're a pessimist about the future or about the natural world. And at the same time, though, you have been so action oriented. You've always, it seems like watching from afar, you've always taken strong action, leading action, just action, action, action. Uh, I listened to a podcast called The Dirtbag Diaries for many, many years, for the last 15 years or whatever. And you used to have an advertisement at the beginning of that, every episode, in which you were quoted saying something like, um, the greatest cure for depression is action. And that has stuck with me as a mantra of sorts ever since. Every time I've ever felt discouraged or worried about the future of these places and these animals and these opportunities that I care so much about, I always go back to that action. Like everything now is action oriented. So I'm curious for you. Most pessimists, most people who think that the world is shot, just throw their hands up and say, "Well, screw it. Nothing I do will make a difference. So I'm just gonna, bury my head in the sand." Why have you taken a different approach? How do you square the fact that you say you're a pessimist, but you are so relentlessly action oriented and seem determined to do something about this so personally?
Well, actually, I know quite a few really well-known environmentalists and scientists and stuff working on global warming, and they're all pessimists. They're not optimists at all, and it's because that's the reality. I mean, that's just the way it is. However, they remain active, so it's not a dichotomy or anything. It's you know i- if you're an optimist, you say, "Oh well, I'm not going to do anything because everything's going to turn out okay."
Hmm.
Nothing gets done, right?
Yeah.
It's better to be a pessimist and an activist. So that's what I am, and I sleep at night knowing that it's what I can do. And like I wrote, I don't know about the other guys in the Pheasant Tail book, but for me, it was a way to proselytize simplicity and prove. It's like I use that metaphor of Italian cooking. Um, Classic Italian cooking uses five ingredients. That's it. Olive oil doesn't count. Garlic doesn't count. But five ingredients. And I've gotten some pastas down now to one ingredient besides the pasta. I mean, I caramelize an onion, great big onion, and cook it in olive oil till it's caramelized and put it on the pasta. And it's one ingredient. It's fantastic. And, or, use the anchovy or something. Uh, so that should be the direction, not, complex sauces, all of that stuff. And so it applies to everything in life, I think. It's to work towards simplicity. And I think we can do something to save the planet by doing that.
By having this, um, for lack of a better way to describe it, just this relentless action focus with this set of problems. What does that do for you as an individual? Because I got to believe there's a lot of folks who have something they care about that's not doing very well right now, and it leaves them in a negative, discouraging place, right? You love fishing and you see the rising water temperatures and you see your favorite rivers being shut down year after year for portions of the year and you can't fish because of that. Or you love hunting upland birds and sage grouse that are disappearing, or lesser prairie chickens are listed, or you love public lands and you're seeing your favorite public land spot being threatened to be sold, or whatever it might be. There's all these different examples. No matter what your thing is, I think we can all point to some example that's worrisome to us, or could change the way we live or change how we interact with these things we care so much about. Um, so I've always understood, having that action oriented approach that you're talking about here, possibly being a pessimist, but being an active pessimist. Um, I can see how that practically is like the only way we ever make things better. But what does it do for you as an individual? How has that impacted like your sanity or your sense of, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. What does that do for you personally? I have some thoughts on what it's done for me, but I'm curious for somebody like you who has lived this for, for many decades. How has that changed the way you live, the way you feel about your life, the way you can sleep at night?
Well, I mean, it's pretty depressing seeing the fate of the planet, seeing all these great species go extinct. When I was born, there was 2,500,000,000 people on the planet.
We've come a
So,
long ways.
I mean, that's 87 years ago, but I mean, that's shocking, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
Wow.
and I when I used to drive from California to Wyoming to go fishing or climbing, and in June, I'd have to stop my car every once in a while to clean the windshield because of so many bugs. And we've lost 70% of the winged insects in the world. 70% already.
Wow.
We hired a guy to do a book on mayflies, the disappearing mayflies. Unfortunately, halfway through the book, he died, but I got to find someone else to finish that book. But I mean, over and over again, especially if you go around the world and you see it. I just on a trip to Patagonia with some friends, and we loaded a truck up with 12 days of camping gear and food, and our goal, 10 years ago, this friend of mine told me about this couple shallow rivers way down in the south that someone had put rainbows in there, and they got so big because it's all alkali water and they're eating freshwater shrimp and stuff, that they're eating endangered hooded grebes, baby
Hmm.
grebes. These rainbows are eating baby
Wow.
grebes. So
Jeez.
I said, well, maybe I can help with that. so so that was the purpose of our trip. You need a purpose, right?
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
useless as it may be. And so we spent 10 days getting down there. By the time we got there, they had 4 days of almost 100-degree temperatures in January,
Hmm.
and it killed all the fish. All these giant rainbows, they're all dead. So I either missed it by 10 years or by 1 month, depending how you look
Jeez.
at it. I
Wow.
mean, and that's happening everywhere. I mean, uh, we, we only have a couple decades more of cold water fisheries worldwide, and that's it. And it's over. You're going to be fishing for carp and walleye. So that can get you down and depressed unless you're still active. And I just say, well, that's the way it is. But I'm doing what I can, and I don't get depressed about it. I I get sad about it, but not depressed.
Yeah. So I heard, speaking of Patagonia, I heard your friend Chris Tompkins say something once that also stuck with me, and it's curious because it connects your your action focus to another sentiment that I'm wondering is hard for you to find, maybe not. But Chris said that hope is action. So you have said that the greatest cure for depression is action, and Chris said that hope is action. So being a self-described pessimist, but also considering what Chris said there, that hope is action. Is there anything that does give you hope about the future of wildlife and wild places? And if so, what is that?
Well, I think hope without action is worthless. I it just assumes that someone else is going to take care of the problem. You know, AI maybe. uh, nah, I don't believe that.
Is there something though that with action paired with hope you do see as giving you some encouragement for the future?
Well, there's a lot of young people that are challenging the way we're living right now. And, you get like in Jackson, you got those trophy homes where these rich guys built it after the kids are gone. They built giant, multi-room trophy homes. And then they realized, Jesus, it's pretty lonely in this house. And they want to move to a smaller house and try to give the house to their kids. The kids won't take it. No, we don't want this big piece of shit. And it's. I mean, the only hope is with the newer generation. I mean, our existing generation is hopeless. If we're not gonna, we're not. I mean, look who we vote for these days. Unbelievable. We've got the government we deserve, and we're not going to change. But the younger people, yeah, I would say that gives me some hope. And it's happening worldwide too. Um, they want a simpler life, uh, and they see the problem. If you agree that global warming is happening, and you choose not to do anything about it, then you really don't believe it's happening. Because if you did, then you'd do something about it, because the consequences are so grim, and it's not going to happen 100 years from now. It's happening right now. I mean, the Gulf Stream is already starting to reverse itself, which puts Europe in another glacial ice age. The you know the birds, the number of birds have fallen like crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, as a fisherman, you see it. You see there's no bugs anymore.
Yeah.
Uh, so
Yeah.
yeah,
It is interesting as somebody who hunts or fishes or gets out there in any kind of capacity. But maybe I'm biased, but I do feel like hunters and anglers especially have a really deep, tight connection to the land and the animals. It's really hard not to see this stuff. You have to really be in denial to not recognize that things are changing in many different ways, right? Whether it's climate or it's development and loss of habitat or whatever, you pick your poison, metaphorically and literally speaking, I guess. But we are truly bearing witness to this because we are out there in it almost more than anybody else. Um, but at the same time, I feel like we live in this era where it feels like so much is decided above us and outside of our hands, and that the ways that our world is changing, the reasons why rivers are getting too warm and mule deer migrations are being cut off and public lands are being developed or threatened to be sold, all these different things. It can very quickly feel like it's beyond us and beyond our ability to make a difference. If I'm listening to this podcast and I hunt or I fish or I climb or I kayak, and my name is not Yvon Chouinard, and I don't own a great big company or used to own a great big company, if I don't have a huge platform, if I don't have a bunch of resources, it's really easy to think, well, yeah, I can take action, but it probably won't make a difference because what could I possibly do? I'm just me. What do you say to that person? What kind of tangible actions could any individual citizen make? This week or this year or this decade. What do you say to somebody like that who has those concerns?
well, first of all, plow up your lawn, get rid of that lawn,
Here,
and
here.
plant native species, especially species that attract moths and butterflies, and we got an insect problem that it could, even if you don't have a lot, even if you have 10 square feet, do that, and it'll make you feel a hell of a lot better. And anybody can do this.
Yeah.
We're trying to save 30 by 30 or whatever it is,
Yep.
50 by 50. Chris Tompkins working in Chile and Argentina. Chile is up to 26% now.
Wow.
One of the highest, the third highest in the world, besides
That's
Costa
amazing.
Rica and Russia. Russia only because they don't have any people there. The U.S. is 16%. We got a long, long ways to go. But if every homeowner got rid of their lawn and planted native plants and stuff, that could be included in this 30 by 30.
Yeah, that's 40 million acres.
Really?
Yeah. Yep. That's a pretty big chunk of land we could make a difference on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to wrap this up kind of by going back to where we began. We talked, about your most recent book, Pheasant Tail Simplicity. We talked about the book prior to that related to fishing, that being Simple Fly Fishing. We've talked about how these ideas of simplification can apply to fishing or hunting or climbing or spearfishing or anything, right? We've talked about why that's, both going to lead to more satisfying experience and also maybe be, lead to a deeper knowledge and actually help you master those things too. But as we've continued and we've talked about more broadly, the state of the natural world and where we're headed, I'm curious if this philosophy of simplicity could also be applied to our endeavors as conservationists. Is there a world in which simplifying or looking at our work as environmentalists or conservationists through this approach of simplifying, could that in some way work as well? And if so, what would that look like?
Yeah. Well, at some point in saving lands, like Chris Tompkins did in Chile and Argentina, at some point, it's not all virgin land. There's people on there. Like in the Amazon, it's full of people. And you can't exclude people from those lands. But we have to make sure that whoever's living on those lands, whether it's indigenous people or whether it's settlers or just households, they can live there in peace with the natural world if they lead simple lives. New Zealand, they had all these rich billionaires from Silicon Valley and stuff go down to New Zealand, buy these big properties. The first thing they do is they fence it off. That's an American thing, fencing everything off. And so that fences off wildlife. And so it's how you live on the land is what's important. I don't know how we do that, but we have to allow people to live on the land where they've always lived, but somehow make sure that they don't cause harm to the native species and stuff.
I imagine that's just as true whether you're in the Amazon or Chile or, living near a woodlot in southern Michigan or living adjacent to the Targhee National Forest in Idaho or the Everglades of southern Florida. No matter where you are, whether you're in America, in a highly developed country, or a less so developed, I imagine there's some version of that could be true, right? We could all, as you've said, cause no unnecessary harm.
Yeah, I love what they do, like in Sweden and some other Scandinavian countries where you're allowed to go on anyone's land as long as you don't cause damage. You can pick blueberries and so there's no fences and I mean, look at our rivers. My God, we've privatized our rivers completely. A young kid now can't walk down to a local river with his cane pole and a can of worms and fish because it's private. You know, in Wyoming, it's landowner owns to the middle of the river, so it forces you to have to float, forces you to pay $1,000 a day for a guide. Young people can't do that, and this privatization of the land it's insidious. It's awful.
Yeah. Yeah. Our public land system and our public water rights where we have them are such a amazing gift where we have those things, and we've got to fight hard to keep that. You know, as we've been having this conversation, Yvon, what I keep coming back to in my mind is how, there's no way to cover everything I want to cover with you in an hour. There's so many questions I've had over the years, as I've seen what you've done with your life, and I've read books about you, and I've read your own words, and have listened to that. And in an hour, of course, we can't cover all that, and probably you couldn't cover everything you have wanted to tell the world across all those books and interviews and films you've been in, and all these different things. But the saying is very true that actions speak louder than words. And I think for anyone who's listening to this today, who is hearing your thoughts on the future of the natural world, and how do we live alongside of it, and how do we make sure there's some better future, and how do we live in such a way that we simplify our connection to nature and cause no unnecessary harm, I think my greatest suggestion I'd give to people is to not only listen to what you had to say here today, but also to look at your actions over the years. I think that has been a wonderful model for all of us of how to walk the walk and not just talk it, how to do the two things that you said. One being connect deeply with nature, because that's going to give you the energy and the hope, or the drive to do something. It's also going to cure whatever discouragement or depression you might have. And then finally, to just turn to action over and over and over again. And I am so appreciative that you have modeled that for us over the years. So I just want to thank you for speaking with me today about this stuff. But then even more than that, for giving us a lifetime worth of actions to learn from. So thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome. I mean, I'm a pretty simple guy. That's why I like simplicity.
I've got a lot to learn on that front, but I think you've given me a good place to start. So in all seriousness, thanks for this conversation, Yvon, and for all that, and I hope we can do it again sometime soon.
Thank you.